The envelope had been sitting on the kitchen counter for 3 days, before my father finally noticed it. I watched him from the hallway. He was still in his work clothes, that gray blazer he'd worn every Thursday for as long as I could remember, and he was standing very still, staring at the return address, in the upper left corner. His coffee mug was in his hand. He hadn't taken a single sip. I went back to my room and closed the door quietly. Before I get into this, I want to ask you something. Leave it in the comments. What's the one thing a parent said to you that you never forgot? Not because it was kind? I'll start. You're here because I let you be here. Don't forget that. I was 19 when my father said that to me. We were standing in the kitchen of the house I'd grown up in. The house in Mississauga, the one with the cracked driveway and the garden my mother used to tend before she got sick. He'd said it calmly, the way he said most things, like he was reading from a list he'd already reviewed. I remember the sound of the refrigerator humming behind me. I remember thinking, did he just say what I think he said? He had, and I remember I just nodded. 19 years old, and I just nodded like that was a reasonable thing for a father to say to his daughter. That moment stayed with me. Not loud, not dramatic. It sat somewhere behind my ribs for years and years, quiet and heavy, and I carried it the way you carry something you've convinced yourself you're used to. My name isn't important. What's important is that I grew up in a house where love was conditional, and I didn't understand that until I was old enough to see what unconditional love actually looked like in other families. I grew up watching my best friend's mother hug her in grocery store parking lots, just because. I grew up watching fathers in the neighborhood wave from driveways, ask how school was going, remember names of teachers, small things. But I noticed them the way you notice water, only when you're thirsty. My father wasn't cruel in the way that leaves marks. He was a different kind. He was the kind of man who paid for everything and made sure you knew exactly what that cost him. He sent me to a good university, University of Guelph, and he brought it up at every family dinner for 4 years. I'm paying for her education, he'd say, gesturing toward me like I was a renovation he'd approved. He came to my convocation ceremony and took exactly 2 photographs. I still have one of them. He's not looking at the camera. My mother had passed away when I was 16, breast cancer, fast and brutal. And after that the house changed. My father changed. He grieved, I think, in the only language he knew, control. He became more rigid, more precise, more certain that the world owed him order, because it had taken something irreplaceable from him. I understood it, even then. I'm still not sure understanding it helped. After university, I moved back home. I was 23, working at a property management firm in downtown Toronto, commuting on the GO train every morning at 6:45. I paid rent, my father insisted, and I paid it on time every month, deposited directly into his account, $600, which, for Mississauga even then, was nothing. But that wasn't the point. The point was that it was a transaction. Everything with my father was a transaction. I was fine with it, or I told myself I was. Then my grandmother died. My father's mother. A woman I loved deeply, who used to call me her sunshine girl, and send me cards on my birthday with $20 bills tucked inside, long after I was old enough to appreciate the gesture more than the money. She died on a Tuesday in November, peacefully, in her sleep, in the house she'd owned in Hamilton since 1974. That house, that's where everything begins. My grandmother had told me, years before she passed, that she intended to leave the Hamilton property to me. We'd talked about it over tea one afternoon at her kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug, her voice matter-of-fact. Your father has his money, she'd said. You're still building yours. The house should go to you. I didn't know what to say. I thanked her. I assumed she'd told my father, or that her lawyer would handle it, or that it would all unfold the way these things are supposed to unfold. What I didn't realize was that my father had decided, quietly and without any consultation, that the house should not go to me. I found out the way you find out most painful things, sideways, without warning. It was my aunt who told me, at the reception after the funeral, standing near the dessert table with a plate of butter tarts she wasn't eating. She'd assumed I already knew. She'd assumed my father had spoken to me. He hadn't said a word. The will had been contested. That was the word my aunt used, contested. My father had retained a lawyer and filed a challenge on the grounds that my grandmother had not been of sound mind in her final years. Which was, and I want to be careful here, because I want to be accurate, not true. My grandmother had been sharp and present and fully herself until the very end. Her doctor would have said so. Anyone who knew her would have said so. But my father had filed the challenge anyway. I drove home from the reception in silence. I sat in my car in our driveway for a long time, long enough that the motion sensor light on the garage came on and then clicked off again. I thought about the fact that my grandmother had wanted me to have that house. I thought about the fact that my father had decided to override that, without asking me, without telling me, without apparently considering for one moment how I might feel about it. I went inside. My father was in the living room watching the news. He looked up when I came in. "Long day," he said. "Yeah," I said. I went upstairs. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark, and I thought about 19 years old, and I'm paying for her education and $600 a month, and the motion sensor light clicking off in the driveway. I thought about my grandmother's hands around a mug, and the words Sunshine Girl and butter tarts on a plate that my aunt wasn't eating, and I thought, I need to talk to a lawyer. I want to be clear that what I did next, I did not do out of anger. I didn't do it to hurt my father, or to win or to prove a point. I did it because I had to. Because I was 26 years old and I had been existing in my father's house, on my father's terms for long enough, and I had my grandmother's voice in my memory, telling me she wanted me to have something that was hers. And I believed that voice deserved to be honored. I called a lawyer. A woman my coworker had recommended, family and estate law, an office in Oakville. I took a Friday afternoon off work and I drove out to meet her. We talked for almost 2 hours. She went through the details of my grandmother's will. She explained the grounds on which my father had filed his challenge. She asked me questions about my grandmother's health in her final years, about the timeline of the will's execution, about witnesses, about whether there was any documentation of my grandmother's wishes beyond the will itself. There was, as it turned out, there was quite a bit. My grandmother, methodical, organized, the kind of woman who kept every receipt from 1987 in a shoebox labeled by year, had written letters. To me, to my aunt, to her longtime friend who lived on the next street. Letters that talked about the house, about her intentions, about why she wanted it to go to me. Not legal documents exactly, but evidence of intent. Clear, consistent, undeniable evidence of intent. The lawyer leaned back in her chair and looked at me for a moment. "He'll have a hard time making this stick," she said. I drove home and I started looking at apartments, not impulsively. I want to be clear about that too. I looked at apartments the way I'd been looking at apartments in the back of my mind for 2 or 3 years. Carefully, practically, with spreadsheets. I knew what I could afford. I knew what neighborhoods made sense given the GO train line I took to work. I had savings. Not a lot, but some. The kind of savings you accumulate when you're paying $600 in rent and working full-time and being, on the whole, quite careful. I found a 1-bedroom in Burlington. 2nd floor, east-facing, a small balcony that looked out over a parking lot, but also, if you leaned out just slightly to the right, a strip of maple trees that would be extraordinary in October. $1,250 a month, which was real money, but manageable. Laundry in the building. 10 minutes from the GO station. I applied, I got it. I gave myself 4 weeks. I want to tell you what those 4 weeks were like, because I think about them often. I went to work every day. I came home. I had dinner with my father most evenings. He cooked on Tuesdays and Thursdays, simple things, pasta or soup, and we sat at the kitchen table and talked about traffic and the news and whatever was happening at his office. I packed my room gradually, 1 box at a time, starting with things he'd never notice. Books from my shelves, the contents of my desk drawers, winter clothes I didn't need yet. I stacked the boxes in my closet. He never asked what the boxes were for. He never looked. The legal situation with my grandmother's estate moved forward. My lawyer was thorough. My father's challenge, it turned out, was thin. The documentation of my grandmother's mental capacity was solid. The letters provided clear context, and after 2 months of back and forth, his lawyer quietly advised him that continuing would be expensive and unlikely to succeed. My father, I was told, was not pleased. He did not bring it up with me directly. That was not his style. Instead, he became quieter at dinner. More clipped. There was a particular way he had of going silent that managed to be louder than anything he could have said. A charged, weighted silence that filled a room. I'd grown up in that silence. I knew every frequency of it. On a Wednesday evening in March, about a week before my move date, I told him at dinner that I was moving out. I kept my voice steady. I told him I'd found a place in Burlington, that I'd be leaving the following Saturday, that I'd already arranged for a truck. I told him I was grateful for the years he'd let me live there. "Burlington," he said. "Yes, you've already signed something?" "I have." He was quiet for a moment. Then he picked his fork back up and continued eating. And I thought for a brief, hopeful moment that this might simply be how it went. Quiet, functional. The way people manage things when they're doing their best. Then he looked up. "You know," he said, "after everything I've done for you, after everything I've paid for, You go running to lawyers behind my back over your grandmother's house, and now you're just leaving. I looked at him. Your grandmother wanted me to have that house, I said. I had it looked into, that's all, he repeated. There was something in his voice I recognized. The temperature had changed. I'm your father. That house was a family decision. She left a will. I'm your father. He said it again, louder this time. This is my house. I have kept you. I have supported you. I have given you everything. And the moment something doesn't go the way you want, you go running to a lawyer like I'm some stranger. I didn't go to a lawyer because things didn't go my way, I said. I went to a lawyer because Grandma wanted me to have her house and you contested the will without telling me. He stood up. My father standing up from a table was, in my experience, never a neutral gesture. If you want to leave, he said, very quietly now, which was somehow worse than the volume before, then leave. Get out of my house, tonight. I don't want to sit here and be accused in my own home by someone I've given everything to. I looked at him for a long moment. Okay, I said. I pushed my chair back, and I stood up and I carried my plate to the sink. I've rinsed it. I turned off the tap, and then I went upstairs. I'd like to tell you I was calm. I wasn't, entirely. My hands were shaking a little as I opened my closet door and looked at the stacked boxes. 4 weeks of gradual, quiet preparation, and all of it felt, in that moment, like it had known this was coming before I had. I called my friend, the one with the mother who hugged her in parking lots. She answered on the second ring. Can I stay with you tonight? I asked. What happened? I'll explain when I get there. Can I bring a few boxes? Of course, she said. Of course you can. Her name is Philippa. We've been friends since we were 12 years old. I loaded my car that night. I didn't take everything. There was too much and I was too tired, and the truck was booked for Saturday anyway. I took what mattered. My laptop, my documents, the small cedar box where I keep things from my mother, some clothes. I came downstairs with the last bag on my shoulder, and my father was sitting in the living room, the television on, not watching it. He didn't say anything as I walked past. I stopped at the front door. I'll arrange for the rest of my things on Saturday, I said. I'll leave my key on the counter. He didn't turn around. I closed the door behind me. I drove to Philippa's house, and she made tea, and I sat at her kitchen table, the one her family has had for 20 years, the one with the gouge in one corner, from when her brother tried to carve his name into it in grade school. And I cried, which I hadn't done in the car, which I'd been holding on to since I rinsed my plate at the sink. Not dramatic crying, just the kind that comes when something you've been carrying for a very long time finally gets put down. Saturday came, the truck came. Philippa helped, and her husband helped, and by early afternoon I was in Burlington, in my east-facing apartment with the maple trees just visible if you leaned out slightly to the right. I put my mother's cedar box on the windowsill. The estate was finalized about 6 weeks after I moved out. My grandmother's house in Hamilton was transferred to me, legally, completely. With my father's challenge dismissed, I did not celebrate. I cried again, briefly, because it felt less like a victory than like a grief I hadn't known I was carrying. The grief of having to fight for something that should have simply been given. I went to see the house on a Sunday in May. Drove out on the 403, pulled into the driveway I'd pulled into hundreds of times as a kid, sat in the car for a while. The garden needed attention. The driveway needed sealing. The maple tree in the front yard, bigger than I remembered, broader, was just beginning to come in green. I had a property management background. I knew what the house was worth. I knew what it could generate as a rental while I decided what to do with it long term. I also knew, and this is something I've thought about a lot, that I was never going to sell it. Not for a long time. Maybe not ever. Because it wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. My father and I have not spoken since March. I don't know if that's permanent. I think about him sometimes. The gray blazer, the 2 photographs at my convocation, the pasta he made on Tuesdays. I think about the version of him that existed before my mother died. The version I only half remember, softer around the edges. The version that used to carry me on his shoulders at Canada Day fireworks when I was small. I think about what grief can do to a person. How it can calcify inside them. How it can make them grip things. Property, control, the narrative of who owes what to whom. Because everything else feels like it could be taken away at any moment. I understand that about him. I genuinely do. But understanding why someone hurts you doesn't mean you have to keep standing in the way of it. Philippa told me something once, a long time ago, when we were teenagers and I was upset about something my father had said. She said, "Some people show love by giving things, and some people use giving as a substitute for love. They're not the same thing." I was 16 when she said that. I didn't fully understand it then. I do now. I've been in Burlington for 7 months. I take the GO train to Toronto in the morning, and I watch the lake through the window, and I drink my coffee, and sometimes I lean my head against the glass and just breathe. I've painted the living room a color called Quiet Moment, which is a pale sage green that looks different at every hour of the day. I have a neighbor who leaves tomatoes from her garden outside my door in August, just because. Small things. I notice them the way you notice water. My grandmother's house in Hamilton. I've started calling it hers still, even in my own head, because it still feels like hers and I think it always will. I'm taking my time with it. I'm not rushing. I repaired the front step in June. I weeded the garden in July. I found, in a closet on the second floor, a shoebox of letters my grandmother had received over the years. I sat on the floor and read them for 2 hours. She was loved by so many people. I don't think she ever doubted that. I'd like to be the kind of person who loves like that. The kind who makes people feel like they could stay forever, and also always like they are free to go. I'm working on it. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself, you know what that walk down the stairs with a bag on your shoulder feels like. You know what it costs. You know what it frees. I never needed the house, I needed a father. One of those things I eventually got.